Hey everyone, welcome to RetroBreak. Today we're checking out 11 homebrew demakes for the Game Boy Color, starting off with a port of perhaps the best arcade racing game of all time, Outrun, and the Game Boy Color version of this is just insane. Take a look. So in my last video, in the comments, everyone was telling me I need to check this game out, and I was not disappointed. This is insane. This is so incredibly well polished, and unlike a lot of the other games in this list, this is the entire game. They managed to squeeze down every single track and all of the music, and a really good Game Boy rendition of the graphics and the gameplay all into one incredible package. It's completely free to play. I'll put a link to the itch.io page down in the description below, and just look at how incredibly smooth this plays on the Game Boy Color, and playing it on the actual handheld itself really is a sight to behold. It's one thing seeing these games play on an emulator, but you really do owe it to yourselves to check it out on the original console as well for the true experience. And can you just imagine how well this would have done if Sega actually released it back on the Game Boy Color back in the day? Now yes, there was an official 8-bit handheld version of Outrun for the Game Gear, and I've got that right here. So how does the Game Boy Color version compare to this one? Incredibly favourably, actually. In fact, it runs a lot smoother on the Game Boy, and the music is a million times better. Have a look at this quick comparison here between the official Game Gear version and the Game Boy Color demake. So wow, what an incredible way to start this video, but that is just the first of 10 more games that I'm about to show you in this list, which are equally as incredible. Let's check out the next one, which is a demake of one of the most impressive games on the Super Nintendo, and that is Axelay. And this one is just a proof of concept rather than a full game like the Outrun demo, but just look at these incredible graphics running on the Game Boy Color. They really managed to pull off this Mode 7 background scaling technique without any of the special chips available to the Super Nintendo, just using the line scans and different variations in the frame rate, and the result is amazing. I would love to see a full version of this get released in the future, so I really hope the developer's still working on it. It's just such an impressive tech demo, and it would have been incredible to see this graphic style used in an actual release for the console, but just how cool is it seeing this run on the system? Now, the next game in many ways is actually an improvement to the source material. This is a Game Boy Color version of the Philips CDI game Zelda's Adventure. So compared to the other Zelda games on the CDI, Zelda's Adventure is kind of unknown, but also in a way it's kind of the best of the three as well, because this one is actually a proper top-down adventure game. So some fan actually took it upon themselves to recreate the entire game using Game Boy Studio, and the result is honestly better than the source material. So it does away with the incredibly frustrating loading times of the original game, and of course, because this is on the Game Boy, there's none of those horrendous stop-motion FMV scenes like there are in the CDI game either. Even though they are kind of nostalgic in a way, there's no denying that they're absolutely terrible, and most of them are actually just still slideshows rather than actual FMV sequences. So this game really is an improvement. It is still a proof of concept, and there are some things that would need to be improved if this was to become a full proper release of this version of the game. The actual hit detection and the mechanics of using the wand are kind of broken in this build, but the structure is there. You can even see the entire map based on the CDI game, and it's just so much more fun to play than the CDI version, so kudos to the developer. They've done an incredible job actually making one of the worst games ever made actually somewhat playable, so that is a goal accomplished in and of itself. Now the next one is really interesting because they actually attempted to port a fully 3D FPS game to the Game Boy Color. This is a port of Wolfenstein. So when I was originally going to make this list, I was actually going to include Doom here, because there have actually been a few attempts to port Doom to the Game Boy Color, but honestly, none of them really pulled it off that well. They're kind of more static affairs, kind of like slideshows with a few screens that you can move side to side, but not actual proper fully 3D movement. But then I stumbled across this demo of Wolfenstein, which, as I'm sure a lot of you know, uses the same engine as Doom, and this time it is actually fully playable in the full proper 3D perspective. None of this slideshow kind of Windows 95 maze style graphics here. This one is actually fully movable, and there's actually enemies to shoot as well. There's a lot of things that need to be improved in order to make this fully playable, but the concept is absolutely there, and if the developer wanted to, they could take this base and actually turn it into a full version of either Doom or Wolfenstein. So it's just incredible to see this 3D raycasting technology working on something as primitive as the Game Boy. I know there's a few other examples out there that do a similar thing. There's Faceball and there's X, but to see a homebrew developer pull this off is just so impressive, so congratulations. Next is an interesting one, and this is definitely more of a proof of concept than something that you would actually want to play, but I was still so impressed to see that someone's even attempted to recreate this. And this is Mario Maker for the Game Boy Color. There's actually two different versions of this at the minute. There's one for Super Mario Land, and there's one for Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins. And when I say this isn't something that you would actually want to play, that's because it's incredibly slow. The level editor itself literally takes a few seconds to move from one screen to the other, and you can only use the screen of the Game Boy. There's no scrolling in this at all. But it is really impressive that it remembers where the blocks were placed, and it actually allows you to play that back in the actual game itself. But again, it's not really something you would want to play because the physics are all broken and the collision detection doesn't really work properly. But the concept's there, the idea's there, and just to see the fact that you can build the level and then play it and it's got all of the Mario sprites and stuff, it's just so cool. So well done to the developer for getting this far at least, and I would love to see this fleshed out into a proper, like, build your own platformer kit for the Game Boy. Maybe get rid of the Mario branding so that they could actually release it and not have to worry about Nintendo's IP ninjas swooping in and shutting it down, but it's a really great basis for this style of game, so keep at it. I'm really interested to see where this one can go in the future. Now, I'm a massive fan of visual novels. In fact, I just finished reading one yesterday, and I was so happy to see that some homebrew developers have actually decided to recreate some of their favourite visual novels on the Game Boy, and I could never have thought of reading a novel on the Game Boy before, so imagine my surprise when I saw that Higurashi, the amazing visual novel that I read back at uni, is actually available now on the Game Boy, complete with all of the character portraits, all of the background artwork, and all of the story translated and put onto the Game Boy cartridge. It's just incredible, so if you want an entire visual novel experience, it's right there on the Game Boy itself. It is currently work in progress and there's only one chapter done, but by the end of this, the developer actually thinks it's going to span across multiple Game Boy cartridges, so I'm really looking forward to seeing them actually port the rest of this game onto the Game Boy, and it's an incredible game too. If you haven't read Higurashi, please do so because it is such a great story. And another visual novel that I absolutely fell in love with back at uni was a visual novel called Katawa Shoujo, and this one's also been translated to the Game Boy Color as well. Again, complete with all of the background artwork, all of the character portraits, and it's just so surreal seeing this game play out on the Game Boy. Again, it is still work in progress, but I just checked on their itch.io page and they are still making updates, so eventually this might become the full game as well. And again, definitely check out the original release because I absolutely love all of the characters in this game. It really is an amazing visual novel. And the writers for this novel actually went on to make some really great games in the future too. And the next game to round out this visual novel section is actually Phoenix Wright, and when I found out about this, I also found out that originally Phoenix Wright was actually going to be made for the Game Boy Color. So the developer of this Demake actually created this to kind of get an idea of what the original vision for Phoenix Wright might have been like. As I'm sure you know, it did come out on the Game Boy Advance, but to see it running on an 8-bit system is really cool, and they actually included some colour in this version too, unlike the other visual novels which were only in black and white, so really cool to see this. Unlike the other two though, it sounds like the developer isn't interested in carrying this one on, but if you want to experience the first episode of the first Phoenix Wright game on the Game Boy Color, then the option is there, and again, there's links in the description to all of these games. Next is a Game Boy Color demake of The Binding of Isaac, and this one was only made in a few weeks as again a proof of concept, and it could definitely do with some work in the gameplay department, but it definitely got me thinking what a cool concept this would be for a Game Boy Color game. I don't know why they didn't make more of these top-down action games with like unlimited replay value. The original Binding of Isaac is such a simple concept, it could actually fit really well on the Game Boy, so I really hope the developer goes back and improves this, or maybe, like I said with Mario Maker 1, swap the characters and enemies out for their own unique designs and actually build this out into a top-down action game. There aren't really that many of that genre on the Game Boy Color, so it'd be really cool to see that as a full-featured game in the future. Next is a super impressive one. This is Five Nights at Freddy's for the Game Boy, and the first thing that struck me as incredibly impressive with this is the fact that it's fully voice acted. Every single line from the phone call at the start of the game is here on the Game Boy system, and I was just blown away.
I wanted to record a message for you to help you get settled in on your first night. I actually worked in that office before you.
And not only that, the entire game is here too, and it plays incredibly well. Obviously it is a fairly simple game in terms of the technical ability of the game itself. It is kind of just switching camera angles, but they pulled it off incredibly well. Like, you can choose all of the different cameras, it plays exactly the same as the PC version, so you still have the sounds when the enemies are moving around, and you can open and close the shutters on either side and flash the lights into the corridor, and I really did feel that sense of suspense and dread building up as the hours ticked by before I got to the end of the first night, and I'm just so impressed with this, and I was honestly so impressed with this. It has to be one of the best demakes that I've ever seen. It's just impeccable, it controls absolutely perfectly, and like I said, I got just as engrossed playing this on the Game Boy as I did playing the actual full-featured PC version. I would love to see if the developer could tackle some of the other Five Nights games as well, because I really enjoyed some of the later ones with that same point-and-click style gameplay mechanics. It'd be really cool to see how they could fit some of that onto the Game Boy too, but honestly, incredibly impressed with this. And the next game here is Pokemon Scarlett. Yes, the Switch game that only came out a few years ago is now also available on the Game Boy, or at least the first 10 minutes of it is. This is literally just the start of the game with you exploring your house and going to see your rival and picking up your first starter Pokemon and doing the first battle, but it is so cool to experience a game that I've played in full 3D on the Game Boy, and it works incredibly well too. Like, it doesn't feel out of place compared to any of the Game Boy Pokemon games. The style, the new sprites, everything looks fantastic, and I would love to see this fleshed out into a full Pokemon experience. Of course, Nintendo wouldn't love to see that, but I certainly would, and I'm sure a lot of you watching would too. And I wanted to include one more bonus thing in this video. It's not exactly a game as such, but the developer of this Pokemon Scarlet ROM hack actually has a Patreon page where they've taken some of the most popular retro and modern games and shrunk them down onto the Game Boy. They're only screenshots, and it's kind of like a slideshow presentation of what the game could look like on the system, but you can download the ROMs and play them on the actual console itself, and you get like moving sprites and stuff, and it really is an incredible sight to behold some of my favourite classic games ported down onto the Game Boy. So I thought I would leave you with this at the end of this video, and definitely check out their Patreon if you want to see some more of these Game Boy demake kind of proof of concept demos. They're all so impressive, and they've done about 60 at this point, and I'm really curious to see what games they'll tackle next. I've actually done 2 of these style of videos for the Game Boy Advance as well, so if you want to check out some GBA demakes, all of those are incredible by the way. I'll put both of the videos up here either side, so choose one of these videos to watch next, and I'll see you all again very soon. Goodbye.